would like to read with you from Daniel chapter 1. In the 3rd year, the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, the king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. These he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylon and put in the treasure house of his God. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility. Young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that, they were to enter the king's service. Among those who were chosen were some from Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief official gave them new names. Daniel, the name Belteshazzar; to Hananiah, Shadrach; to Mishael, Meshach; and to Azariah, Abednego. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine. And he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way. Now God had caused the official to show favor and compassion to Daniel, but the official told Daniel, "I am afraid of my lord the king. Who has assigned your food and drink? Why should he see you looking worse than the other young men your age? The king would then have my head because of you." This is the word of the Lord. So we are taking a look in the book of Daniel this month. We were looking at David last month, and we'll be walking with Daniel, and we'll rediscover that you are never alone. Christ is with you, and I want to give a special welcome to people who are joining us this morning. We have some great visitors around, and some of you are here because you want to remember that somebody precious God has used in your life, somebody that has gone on into eternity. And that's what these big sandboxes are about, and we have a couple big plates of candles here. And so when it comes time for communion, we're also going to take some time to thank God for these people that he's used in our lives. And we'll give you some specific instructions then. I won't bother talking through it now. When we get there, we're asking that God will touch your heart, that he will comfort you. And for a lot of us, it's somebody that has passed years ago, but it's still like today. And God can comfort you too. He will meet us. And as we take a look at Daniel, we get to see that today that he's in a new chapter in his life. And fortunately, Christ is there even when you can't see him. That some very good news that Troy gave us is there's no spelling test to get to heaven. Aren't you glad of that? So that you don't have to worry about Nebuchadnezzar tonight. You will be okay. But we see that God steers a nation. And unfortunately, sometimes it feels like it's steering off a cliff. We read that Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand. God's people were sent off to exile by God. The God who created them, the God who loved them, the God who was with them, but also in that moment it felt like the God who would just let them down. And nationally, we're stuck in a nation for good or ill, and there's always things that we like in our country and things we don't like in our country. One president a few years ago, I thought, said it very well. He said, "If we ever forget that we're one nation under God, then we will be a nation going under." We need nationally to recognize God, and God is going to work in our country. And there's one great verse back in 2 Chronicles chapter 7, verse 14, says, if my people, God says, who are called by my name, so probably talking more about the church, but God uses the church to influence the whole country. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face, then I will hear from heaven and forgive their sin and will heal their land. We have an influence on our country, but sometimes countries go really, really wrong. There's a country in Southeast Asia, Cambodia, and back in the late 1970s, there was a man named Pol Pot who took over the country who was used by the devil. And there were, at that point, there were 7.8 million people in Cambodia. And over the course of 5 years, he killed a fourth of them. 1.5 to 2 million. He killed a fourth of his country. He didn't want to be threatened by educated people, so if you wore glasses, you were done. It was just a terrible place to be. And 20 years after that, I was at a Christian conference, and I was talking with this young Cambodian pastor, and he told me how one day he was in his village, and they were so glad because government trucks showed up to rescue them because there was a war going on. And so everybody was getting in these government trucks to go off and be rescued. And there were a few hundred people in his village, and everybody got on the trucks to go except for one family, his. That's an awful way to live, to be in a country where things are going that wrong. The good news is that in the middle of a country that's going wrong, God can still steer you. God can still steer you. And when we look at this, we see the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility, the young men with aptitude, without any physical defect. Daniel was one of those. That was a new chapter in his life, wasn't it? But it wasn't the chapter he had planned. Daniel was part of the upper crust. Daniel was part of the young nobility. He had his whole life mapped out. His parents had his whole life mapped out. He's probably a teenager, 20 or so. There's a good chance that they already had his wife figured out, that they had a young woman picked out for him, and he had his whole life planned. And then what happened? He gets kidnapped by Nebuchadnezzar, and he gets carried off several hundred miles to another country, to Babylon, and he is never going to go home again. Everything that he has planned is gone. And if you dig into the Hebrew, there's a good chance they made him a eunuch. Everything that he had planned is gone. His life is not going to unfold the way he wants to. And unfortunately, this morning, as we thank God for people that he's touched in our lives, it's people that we don't get to talk to today, is it? At least they won't talk back to us. We can talk to them. It's people that we don't get to hug the way we want to. It's a new chapter in your life. And if a lot of you are like me, where that chapter came crashing in totally unexpected. And you lost somebody that was very precious to you. And people around you said things and did things that hurt. And hopefully there were a few people around you that said things and did things that helped. But if you're like me, every day you cried for months. And years later, you think about that person, and you're still right there, and the tears start to flow. Because love doesn't die. And God has used this person in your life. And it's a new chapter, and I'm sorry that the old chapter's gone. But God is in the new chapter, and he wants to do something new in your life. And he wants to use you to bless other people. And there's no shortcut through whatever grief you're dealing with. But God can carry you through that. He won't just navigate you through. He will carry you through. And there will come a time when you will be able to look in the rearview mirror and it won't be so dark and foggy. And God will bring healing. Doesn't mean that you don't grieve. It doesn't mean that you don't still feel the loss. But God has a new path of blessing that He's going to create. And He can use you to bless people in a way that you couldn't before. And so we thank God for these people that He's used to bless us. And we grieve what we've lost. And even if we don't feel it, we can still say, God, I know you're here. I don't feel it yet, but I know that you're with me. And it seems to me like that's where Daniel was. They spoke the wrong language. The architecture was wrong. The food was wrong. He was likely taken away from his family, and God was still with him. It's a new chapter in his life. That Cambodian pastor that I told you about, where the whole village got on the trucks and he and his family were the only ones not allowed to get on a truck. All the trucks were going off to an execution. And he and his family were the only ones from their village who survived. God can guide you in beautiful ways in the middle of a dark time. I got a message on Facebook Messenger, which I don't look at very much. A few weeks ago, I got a friend I hadn't talked to for a few years, and he said, "Are you still alive? Can you call me?" So I got a hold of him. And Kirk Hamilton is just a wonderful man, and his father loved Jesus, and he loved Jesus, and he was an incredible young salesman, and he started drinking too much. And he lost his job, and as he slipped into alcoholism, and he lost his wife, and his life fell apart for years. And then God got a hold of him again. And I got to know him in chapter 2 or chapter 3 or chapter 4 of his life. I got to know him when God had put him together as a godly salesman again. And then I got to work with him in homeless ministry. And God brought along and reunited with him with his wife, whom he had lost for 35 years. And they are happily married. And then God made him into a minister. Grew up a Baptist, then he was a Presbyterian, and now he's a Lutheran pastor. Can you figure? God will guide you. And he uses the junk that other people have dumped into my life or the junk that I dragged into my own life, and he creates good things. Daniel resolves to serve God. Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine. We need to center our life in God and not in anything else. On the right there, I was subscribed to this design portfolio on the internet, and this was a very, very popular meme that you need to decide your own worth. Beauty begins the moment you decide to be yourself. No, I don't decide my own worth. God decides my worth. I lean into Him. That would be the opposite of the truth. That God decides my worth. And Daniel resolves to serve God. So what's wrong with this food? It's really superfood, except that it has been dedicated to idols. And Daniel wants the king and everybody else to know that I only pray to God. I don't pray to anybody else. There is only one God. There's not optional gods out there. And so Daniel says, I can't eat that. But as he resolves to serve God, that's not an easy position to be in. He's doing something hard. I remember when I was in college, I was working at a utility company. Started there in high school, worked there a couple years in college, and a bunch of my coworkers all left early every day. They'd show up late, they'd leave early for lunch, they'd come home, they'd come back late after lunch, and they'd leave early at the end of the day. And to me, that just seemed dishonest. So I stayed until 5 o'clock, and it was miserable. And then I thought, well, just get over it. And I kept, and you know what? It was easier to just be honest and put in the time. But it was a decision. You need to decide, I'm going to do the right thing, even when everybody around me is doing the wrong thing. And Daniel, he doesn't throw a fit. He doesn't stomp his feet. He doesn't launch a petition or a protest. It says he is decided, he is resolved not to defile himself, but he asks the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way. He's decided there's no way I'm ever going to eat this. But he doesn't say that to the boss. He says, I would like permission not to do this. And sometimes Christians want to do the right thing, but we want to make the other person feel bad. We want to stomp our feet. We want to win against the other person. We want to make them feel like a loser. We don't need to do that. We can look for a gracious way to help that person save face. He says, please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Have you ever heard of a group of young men who asked for only vegetables for 10 days? Never happened, has it? But that's what Daniel did, and God honored that. So that picture on the right is from a high school senior named Sophia Shoemaker. She's a high school senior out in Colorado Springs, Colorado. And high school seniors in that school are encouraged to decorate their parking places. So this is the design that she submitted. It says 1 Corinthians 13:4, and it has a picture of a shepherd holding his staff and sheep and this Bible reference. And what does this verse say? It's not very controversial. It says, love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud. And the school said, no, you can't do that. That's wrong. Well, they said, that's religious. You can't do that. And so she tried to make it a little less religious. They still wouldn't do it. So what she's ended up putting on her parking place is a fish swimming against a whole school of fish. One person going against the grain. I think that's pretty wise, because she wants people to know that she just follows Jesus. So she has talked to a legal foundation, and they're talking to the school now, saying she should be able to do her parking place calling on God. So that hopefully that'll get worked out. But she didn't go in and start a fight. But she's not letting it go either. She's trying to make it go in a godly direction. And Daniel obeys, and what happens when we obey? Well, obedience somehow aligns us with God's blessing. It allows God to do good things. We read that at the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. God blessed them. God showed up and did something surprising in their lives. It wasn't the results that their boss was expecting, but God wants to do good things in your life. So I'm working in that utility company and showing up every day on time and staying until the end of the day and trying to do good work, even though I didn't feel like I was very good at it. And one day the boss came to me and he said, I need to hire somebody for the summer. We're behind on work. Do you know anybody that I could hire for the summer? And there was a college student that had helped at my church in Vacation Bible School, and he was studying architecture. And so I told my boss, I have a friend. His name is Joel Quanbeck. He's Rod's older brother. And so he was a student at North Dakota State University, and the boss called up his daughter at NDSU and said, there's a fellow named Joel Quanbeck I'm thinking of. You should hire him. And so Joel came and worked there for a couple of summers, and we got to pray together day by day. And I didn't know that he had a younger brother named Rod, but that's okay. God worked that out later. And then when I was finished, my boss hired my younger brother, and it's amazing. If you do the right thing in little things, God will bless some bigger things, and he'll bless other people through you. It's what we want to do. We want to open doors for other people. And as I think about what Daniel went through, Daniel's life did not get easy. Daniel woke up really every day of his life as a slave. Now, he was a really powerful slave. He ended up being a leader in the government, but he was still under the thumb of the leader. And he was still far from home, not allowed to go live back home anymore. But God blessed him, and God guided him, and God used him in incredible ways. We're going to see that this month. And this morning, we're thinking about the people that God has used in our lives. And what does Jesus say about life and your life and eternity? Jesus said, God is not the God of the dead, but of the living. For to him all are alive. Jesus said that God says, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They're still living. I want to meet Daniel someday. And I want to see my little boy someday. And you have people that you care about. And this morning, we want to think about how God works in us, not only today, but through eternity. This life is kind of an introduction or a prologue. It's not the main story. The big story is going to come in eternity. We can't even conceive of what it will be like. Today matters. The introduction, the prologue, this is going to set you up for eternity, and God wants to work in your life every day today. So we want to call on Jesus this morning, and we want to call like Daniel and say, God, show me how to live. God, forgive me for my stumblings. Thank you for sending Jesus to die for me. And we thank you for the promise of resurrection. Let's continue our worship together. Amen.